In my previous Terraria mini-series, I beat the game using only Zappinators, and I really enjoyed the challenge that this provided. So in today's video, I want to do something similar and try and beat Terraria using only dart weapons. Unlike the Zappinator challenge, as I started this playthrough, I immediately had access to the blowpipe. So as I spawned into existence, my first objective was acquiring said weapon. Unable to utilize any other weapon, I tried my best to dodge slimes and other surface foes as I scoured the land in search of chests. Although I was able to find numerous chests on my adventure, at first I was actually quite unlucky in my search for a blowpipe, so as night fell upon my world, I was forced to hide in a hole and wait for morning to continue my search. As dawn arrived, the threats of the night dispersed, allowing me to continue my journey. This time, I decided to travel left, as the right side of the world had not yielded me what I was after, and this proved to be a good decision, because not long after setting off, I finally got my hands on my first weapon. With the blowpipe in hand, I collected some seeds to use as ammo until I could craft some darts, and then I headed down into the caverns to try and get some accessories and armor that would help me survive the jungle where I would have to go if I wanted to craft better ammo. Once I had collected enough ore to craft armor and had found a double jump, I felt ready to attempt the jungle. Many of the creatures there dropped stingers, which could be used to craft poison darts, a huge upgrade to the seeds that I had been using as ammo prior. With this extremely important upgrade taken care of, I was now confident enough to fight my first boss. Once I returned to spawn, I began building a simple arena that I would be able to use in my fight against the Eye of Cthulhu. Once finished with construction, night had enveloped my world, so I grabbed a suspicious eye and summoned my first boss to face. As the massive optic ball approached, I first used my poisonous darts to begin dealing damage to the boss, as well as picking off the servants of Cthulhu that were spawning. With the help of constant poison damage that my darts applied, before long, the Eye of Cthulhu burst off its outer layer, revealing the grotesque teeth hidden below and signifying the start of Phase 2. As the boss began dashing after me, I continued to dish out massive damage with my darts. But as the fight drew near a close, Cthulhu's increasing speed began to catch up with me as I started taking heavy damage from the boss's chaotic attacks. However, even with his best efforts, in the end, my blowpipe was able to come out on top, defeating Cthulhu. Seeing the capabilities of my current loadout, I decided that I was ready for the next boss. After reaching the Crimson, I ventured down into the infected caves and began setting up an arena that I could use in my upcoming fight. Once ready, I used some bombs to destroy the nearby Crimson Hearts, angering the boss enough to attack me. As the brain of Cthulhu approached, I was quickly cornered by his creeper guardians, taking numerous blows and dropping a good bit of health. But although the start to the fight was not ideal, once I made it to my arena, I was able to begin turning the tides of the fight around. With continued shots from my darts, I started picking off the creepers one by one, and before long, all that was left was the brain himself. Seeing that his minions were no longer around to protect him, the brain of Cthulhu began making dashes at me in an attempt to end the fight. Growing increasingly desperate as his health continued to drop, the brain began using an illusion in an attempt to trick me, but it was no use. Before long, the poison from my darts became too much for the brain to handle, and he burst into pieces, providing me with his loot. Now that I had taken down my first couple of bosses, I decided that it was time for an armor upgrade. Because dart weapons are part of the ranger class, I wanted to go for something that gives bonus to range damage instead of just crafting evil armor like I normally would. This meant that I had to head down into the underground desert and collect fossils that I could use in an extractinator. Once I had collected what I felt like was enough fossils, I returned to the surface, but before I could craft my armor, I was attacked by a goblin army. And as if the goblins weren't enough, not long after the army arrived, a blood moon rose over my world, introducing even more foes for me to fight. After the goblins were defeated and the night was finally over, I began to extract the resources out of the fossils that I had collected earlier, and using the sturdy fossils that I obtained from this, I crafted a full set of fossil armor, which provided me with some nice ranger bonuses. Thinking back to the goblin army that I had just defeated, I realized that I could now find the goblin tinkerer underground. So, with the aid of a hunter potion, I set off on an expedition to find him, and once I did, I purchased some rocket boots and a tinkerer's workshop, both of which would provide me with some better accessory options. Now that I had upgraded my armor and accessories, I set my sights on my first weapon upgrade of the playthrough. If I could beat Queen Bee, the witch doctor could move into my world, bringing with him the blowgun trade. So I began making my way towards the jungle with the intention of slaying Queen Bee and collecting this better weapon. Once I found a hive, using my pickaxe, I began excavating an open area nearby that I could use to fight the bee. And once I was finished with this tedious task, it was time to take on the queen. As I entered the hive, I fired off a single shot, destroying the larva and enraging the head bee. With the queen's arrival, I began to fire off my darts, starting to chip away at her health. Unfortunately for me though, because I was fighting a bee, the poison from my darts had no effect on her, reducing the damage that I would have dealt otherwise. Even still, the base damage from my darts and the continuous stream of attacks was enough to deal good damage to the boss. As the fight continued, Queen Bee started speeding up her assault in an attempt to rid me from the jungle, but using my new movement accessories, I was able to continue dodging most of her attacks. As the fight drew near a close, Queen Bee reached high enough speeds that it became hard to hit her with my relatively slow-moving darts, and I began to lose health, but fortunately, I was able to land a couple more lucky shots and managed to take her down. Now that I had the ability to get the witch doctor in my world, I began the construction of a beautiful wooden tower, the likes of which had never been seen before. And after not long, the NPC that I was after moved in, allowing me to purchase my next weapon. Now that I finally had the blowgun, I wanted to try it out on someone, so I ventured off to the dungeon and set up a couple of platforms before speaking to the old man and releasing his curse. As Skeletron approached, I began firing my high-damaging darts at his hands, quickly dropping their health. But, as I soon realized, the hardest part of this fight was that I couldn't really see the projectiles that I was firing because it was so dark, making it quite hard to aim at the boss. Fortunately though, I was still able to land a good portion of my shots, and before long, I was able to take down Skeletron's hands. Angered by my actions, Skeletron began making mad dashes in my direction in an attempt to hit me, as well as firing off his magical skulls. But even with his best efforts, using my new weapon and superior movement accessories that I possessed, I was able to evade Skeletron and finally defeat him. With my newly acquired access to the dungeon, I could now collect bones from the enemies that resided deep within, and this meant that I could make myself new, more powerful armor. After exploring around in the dungeon and collecting a good supply of bones, I returned to my base, and along with cobwebs that I had collected earlier, I crafted myself this new set of armor. Now that I had my final upgrade complete, I knew that it was time to take on the Wall of Flesh. After completing my elevator, I began making some preparations in the underworld that would make the upcoming fight easier, and once I felt that the terrain was ready, I ventured to the edge of the world and tossed a voodoo doll into lava, summoning the wall to face me. As the fleshy monster approached, I began to fire my darts at the hungries that were guarding the wall's vulnerable eyes, with a few of my shots even making it through the wall's defenses, slowly dropping his health as the fight continued. With the battle raging on, more and more of the wall's minions continued to spawn. Seeing this, I realized that the slow fire rate of my weapon would not be able to keep up, so I switched my focus onto the boss itself, hoping that enough of my shots would be able to make it to their target. With the wall's health dropping lower and lower, the boss began to ramp up the speed of his attacks, dealing significant damage to me in the process. With my health continuing to drop, I gave everything that I had into landing a few more hits on the boss, and with one final screech, the Wall of Flesh finally succumbed to my darts and crumbled to the ground. After claiming my loot, I returned to the surface and surveyed my surroundings, knowing that a new challenge had just begun. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to be notified when I upload part 2 in the future. And if you're interested in live content, I have a Twitch channel. There will be a link in the description if you're interested. But with that out of the way, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you to Beav Notice Me Senpai and all my other patrons for helping make this video possible.